Yo, Adam Saxon with Guy in a Cube, and in this video, I want to share with you how we can control access to a lakehouse or warehouse inside of Microsoft Fabric. One of the things that we know is coming is this one security option for OneLake. So that's where you can actually put access controls on the actual lake itself. So the Parquet files, the Delta files that are in OneLake, and then that will end up traversing into the different engines that are inside of Microsoft Fabric. But that's not there yet. And so how do we actually control access to this? So I want to walk you through the different levels of control that you actually have. So enough of all this talking, you know we like to do it here on Guy in a Cube. Let's do what? Let's head over to my laptop. So we are inside of a workspace. This workspace itself, I've got some lake houses in here. And what I want to start with is workspace roles. So if we come into manage access inside of the workspace, we can see that a couple of users have access to this workspace. Myself and Patrick are admins of the workspace, and then we see John Doe there with viewer. And if you remember, we have 4 different roles inside of a workspace. We have an admin, a member, a contributor, and a viewer. So admin, member, and contributor, they have access to these items, right? So they can look at the data, modify items. They can actually see the data inside of the workspace. Now the viewer role, what they only have access to is the SQL endpoint of your given lakehouse and also the warehouse. They're not going to be able to actually go in to the lakehouse and see the data. So we know John Doe is a viewer here. So let's go over to John Doe. And if I go in and actually choose the lakehouse, not the SQL endpoint, the actual lakehouse, it'll come in here and say, look, you can't read data in the lakehouse itself because I don't have permissions to this. I'm just a viewer. Now, if we get out of this and we go to the SQL endpoint, we can actually see that look, I can see the data. I can actually view this. I can connect to this with Management Studio or other SQL tools to actually get this data out. So that's cool. That's one way to actually control. But by default, anything that's exposed through that SQL endpoint, they can see that data. So they have viewer access into the workspace and they can see different items inside of the workspace. But what if I actually just had a database out there or a lakehouse or warehouse, like a traditional SQL approach where I just want to give folks access to this. Maybe they don't want to do reports inside of Fabric. Maybe there's some external tool that wants to connect. How do I let them connect to the SQL endpoint without giving them access to the whole workspace? Is that even possible? Let's go look at sharing. So I'm going to go back to my user. That's an admin. And if I come in here, let's go into the actual lakehouse itself. So I'm an admin and I can get access to this lakehouse and I can see all the data. So now if I want to come up here and I want to say share, this gives me options to let other people have access to these items and I can control what exactly they have access to. So the first item here, read all SQL endpoint data. This basically lets them use that SQL endpoint. So if I just wanted them to be able to connect externally through a tool that just connects to SQL, that's the option I want to use. So that lets them actually connect and query data through the SQL endpoint or like via TDS, which is the protocol for that. So it's just a SQL endpoint going against the lakehouse or the warehouse. The beauty of this is that all of these options, these apply both to warehouse and lakehouse. And if you figure it out for one, you figured it out for the other. This next option, the read all Apache Spark, this allows actual read access to the Delta files in OneLake. So this allows Spark to actually go read that data. And so if you give this permission, they will be able to actually work with the files in OneLake. And then the build reports on the default data set, this allows you basically build permissions on that data set so that they can build reports. And you can control that separately outside for your data sets and whatnot. So I'm going to go ahead and give another user, Jane, access to the SQL endpoint. So she'll be able to actually go see that data. So I'm going to grant. And then if I come back to the item here, if we go back and look at the SQL endpoint and I go to manage permissions, you'll now see that Jane Doe has read and read data. So she can go ahead and actually read off of that TDS endpoint. John Doe can do the same because they're a viewer. They can only look at the SQL endpoint. So now how do we actually connect? So if I come in here to the SQL endpoint, I want to go in and copy that SQL connection string. I'm going to go to Management Studio. Let's connect. One thing to make sure is that you're actually choosing the right database name. And then I'm going to hit connect. Now I'm in this lakehouse itself as Jane Doe. And if I want to come into a given table, so let's go ahead and just query the product table. select top rows, and bam, I can run a SQL statement and actually get data off of this because I've provided access through the share. What Jane doesn't have access to is the workspace itself. You won't see the workspace in the list of workspaces for Jane. So let's verify that. So I come in as Jane Doe, I come in to read, and you'll notice that Lakehouse RLS is not in my workspace list because I don't have access to the workspace, but I have access to that TDS endpoint or the SQL endpoint, the SQL analytical endpoint even. So if she has the connection string to that SQL analytical endpoint, she can go query that data. But now I want to take it a step further. I don't want her to see everything. Maybe that's either through rows or through columns. So we can look at things like row level security, column level security, data masking. You have all of these capabilities available to you. So let's go check that out. Let's go back into my Lakehouse itself. I've actually created a statement here using a security policy to implement row level security. So I've got a table value function that's going to get the actual username for the sales rep, and then I'm going to apply that on the sales rep column of my internet sales table. So this is how I'm going to restrict data into this given table itself. So if we go look at that table, again, I'm in here as an admin, but one thing you'll see even in the view here is that it's actually restricting data to me. So I can only see my data. So row level security is taking effect here, and I've got a sales rep field on my internet sales table itself. This is one difference between Power BI and a Lakehouse warehouse. When we think about row level security in Power BI, I can apply that filter on my dimensions, and that filter will actually carry through the relationships into my actual fact table, right? From a SQL standpoint, it's contextual to the table that you're applying. So I actually have to have this column available on my fact table in order to apply row level security. In this case example, I'm using it based on the user. So you could do it based on a given field and the data that's associated in there. There's different strategies to apply row level security, but just know that it has to be specific to that table. And if you wanted multiple tables restricted, you'd have to apply that security policy against the different tables. So let's see what this looks like for Jane. I'm under my login, and we can see that I'm restricted to myself. So if we come back in here, so we'll go run this query, and we can see that I'm only seeing data as Jane. And if we do a distinct, you'll see that only Jane's data is applied here because row level security is taking effect. So they don't have access to the whole workspace. They only have access to the SQL endpoint. Life is good. What about columns? I don't want them to get access to certain columns. So let's go back to my Lakehouse, and we'll come down here, and I've got object level security. So you can do the different permissions. So like grant permissions, deny permissions, and you'll see here that I'm actually denying select on certain columns for Jane itself. And you can do this for roles. You can do it for different options that are available for you. So if we go back, let's just do a select all. So select top on 1,000, it'll be all of the columns. And we will see here that bam, this select doesn't work because we've restricted access to certain columns. And you'll notice that the other query I did on internet sales, it did work because I did it on columns that Jane was allowed to see. We're just layering security in here to control how we want users to access that data. Again, just because one security isn't in place, that doesn't mean that Fabric is not secure. There are different security elements you can apply based on what your approaches are. And like I said, this works for Lakehouse and Warehouse. So let's go look at Warehouse and see what's going on. So let's go back in. I'm going to change my Warehouse to Warehouse Final. And if we go look at Manage Permissions, we'll see here that only Patrick and myself have access to this, and we're admins of the workspace. So if we come into my Warehouse itself, we can see our tables. I'm logged in as my user. Now, one thing you'll see here is I do have this configure object level security. So this is column security. So I'm saying deny select on quantity for Jane Doe. So we're going to do the same thing we did before. We're going to go to share. I'm going to say read all data using SQL. I don't care about the build, and we'll give access to Jane. So I'm not giving her access to the workspace. I'm just giving her access to the SQL endpoint of the warehouse. So we'll go ahead and run this deny. Now let's go back and get our connection string. We'll go back into Management Studio. Let's go connect, change our database. And then we're going to do the same thing we did before. We're just going to select top 1,000 rows, and we should see a select deny on this. And we do. Permission was denied on the quantity column. And so if I get rid of quantity from my select list and run this, it should work. And I see data. What do you think? Are you aware of these security options for you? Does this make you feel better about Fabric actually being secure? Let me know in the comments below. And are you looking forward to One Security as well? That's going to change the game a little bit, and we'll be covering it here on Guy in a Cube as well. As always, thank you so much for watching. Keep being awesome, and we'll see you in the next video.